Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to this Governors for Schools webinar. The focus of our webinar this morning is Ofsted in 2024 going into 2025. A couple of housekeeping points before we start, if you wouldn't mind. For some reason, we've got a little bit of a glitch our end this morning. We don't have the question and answer facility. So if I could ask you to use the chat facility, that should be on your toolbar as well. Any questions, just put them into chat, and Linda or I, whichever one is not speaking at the time, will actually respond to you if we can, or we'll read the question out to the other so that we can share it with everybody else. So with no more ado, we will actually kick off the webinar. My name is Steve Barker, and I'm joined by my colleague Linda Waghorn this morning. We're here from Better Governor, and we're delighted to be supporting our colleagues at Governors for Schools in delivering this webinar for you this morning. As I intimated in my words before we started, this is your session, so please, any comments, questions as we're going through, put them in the chat box, and Linda and I will do our level best to be able to respond to them. As far as the aims for this morning's session are concerned, what we want to try and do is, certainly for those of you who perhaps are expecting an inspection in the not too distant future, we're going to explore how schools are currently being inspected and will continue to be inspected until at least September 2025. That's significant because there's lots of talk at the moment about what's changing about Ofsted, what's coming and what isn't. Nothing more is actually going to change that we know about at this stage until at least next September, when a new framework comes in. What we're going to do, of course, is clarify what governors and trustees need to ensure is in place if they are expecting visitors from Ofsted in the not too distant future. But all of that is actually about reflecting effective governance in our schools. Our belief, and you'll hear Linda say this a little bit later, is very much that we shouldn't be getting ready for Ofsted. We should be ready for Ofsted, because what Ofsted want to see is effective schooling, but actually they want to see effective governance as well. And then at the end of the session, what we'll do is just spend a little bit of time briefly highlighting what we already know about Ofsted's future plans in terms of how the inspection system is actually going to evolve over the next 12, 18 months or so. So with no more ado, I'm going to hand over to Linda, who's going to talk you through the first slides that we've got.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Steve, and good morning, everybody. So we'll start with the basics. The power to come into schools and make an inspection is rooted in the Education Act 2005. And for those of you that have been governors for some time, we often referred to the two different types of inspections, two main types of inspections, the Section 5 inspections and Section 8 inspections. So now the new paperwork which supports the unchanged framework, as Steve just highlighted, are now talking about ungraded inspections. Here, still inspected under Section 8. That's where the detail comes from. And Section 5 inspections, which they now refer to as graded inspections. So the difference between those is that in terms of a graded inspection, they look with fresh eyes at each of those areas, and they will come to a decision about the evidence that they see. With the ungraded inspections, they are checking that things are as they expect them to be, against their previously good or outstanding judgments that were made in the past. So graded and ungraded, they look very similar, they feel very similar unless you're a very small school, but they are rooted in the Education Act in these two sections. And then, as Steve said, the actual framework setting out the principles of the way that an inspection is carried out, that is 2019, September 2019. We do not have a new framework, but there was something called the Big Listen last year, consultation process that Ofsted ran, and the results of that are now starting to shape and inform, as well as new government policy, of course, what a new framework, which the earliest it could be introduced is next September, might look like. So the framework, still 2019, there's been a change of emphasis and of working arrangements, which we will highlight. the framework remains the same, and the inspection handbooks, so those are the detailed handbooks that the inspection team use. They are still shaped under the 2019 framework, but there are nuanced changes to the handbooks that set out in a slightly different way how certain aspects of that framework will be managed during a formal inspection. So let's just look at the inspection handbook itself. As with many government documents now, this is in an HTML format, so you can't just look at the handbook as a sort of total document, but I think it works quite well in that way. You can jump to different sections, so it is an online document. It's not bedtime reading. It's not something we would expect every governor to read through every line of. In fact, it would be quite dense to be able to get through all of that anyway, but it's a good reference material. And we'll highlight some sections of that as we go through. And you may want to just go and have a look at some of those different sections, especially if you are a school that is expecting to go through this process in the coming months, or certainly, before the end of the spring term next year, just to sort of clarify some of those areas. So let's have a look at what you would expect if your school were to be selected for inspection. So as I said before, if the school was previously graded and had a report that said it was either outstanding or good, then it will have what is called an ungraded inspection. So this works on the premise that your school remains good or outstanding, and they would come and have a look at the school, have conversations with different segments of the school, look at evidence that was in existence, and they would be looking to really confirm that the school was still in that position of being a good or an outstanding school. If the school was graded as required improvement or inadequate, so at the moment the framework sets out 4 possible outcomes from an inspection. So if the school was previously requires improvement or inadequate prior to this September, then it will have a fully graded inspection. So they'll look at all of the evidence and come to a best fit decision about each of those 4 sections. We'll talk a little bit more about those on a later slide. And in that case, they will make individual judgments about each of those 4 areas. Any school can have an inspection under Section 8 at any time. They are called urgent inspections in the handbook. And these are usually, if there is a complaint or a series of complaints, they won't look at an individual complaint at all. But if it's brought to Ofsted's attention, and the regional director will then make a risk assessment and decide whether an urgent inspection can be carried out. And they are usually around areas of concern such as staff and pupil safety, well-being, or educational standards. They are not a normal part of the regime. They are in response to qualifying complaints.
We've got a couple of questions, Linda, actually, just before we move on.
Yeah.
Question from Vicky: how different is the process framework for school inspections in Wales? Obviously, as you say, Vicky, Estyn is the equivalent of Ofsted in Wales. Their processes are not dramatically different, but obviously you'd need to look at the framework and the information that's online for them. And then Catherine saying, if the inspection prior to the current one was ungraded, will it be graded this time round, even if it maintained good? I don't know whether you want to answer that, Linda, or whether
No, go ahead, Steve.
I was to say my view would be it can be. There is no hard and fast rule, and Ofsted would look at what information they've got. So of course your published data, if there are any concerns have been raised in terms of qualifying complaints, specifically relating to safeguarding usually, but it could be. Another ungraded inspection. It might be a Section 5. Ofsted need to do a cross sample over time. So again, that's why there's no hard and fast rule on that, I'm afraid.
And just to clarify, and although that question hasn't been asked, if during an ungraded inspection, uh, they were to see some evidence that suggests that the school isn't doing as well as they had expected, they can reserve the right to change the inspection to a Section 5, to a graded inspection. So they work on the premise that if you were previously good or outstanding, you will have maintained that approach and you will have looked at the things in the previous report that they said you needed to work on, and they will look for evidence of that. But if there is any concerns that around safety or standards, they reserve the right to be able to make those changes and change it to a graded inspection.
And in fact, the same would be true if you were good. And I can see Sophie's just put a question on this. If you were good last time and they believe you're now outstanding, would that trigger a Section 5? It certainly wouldn't be converted to a Section 5. But if Ofsted's told you in the report, which they do, then they would announce that they would come back. And I think the limit there is still within 2 years to do another inspection, which would, of course, be a Section 5 because you can't change the grade, as Linda said, without a Section 5 inspection.
So it's really important, and I think we're coming on to preparing. It's really important that your first point of preparation is, I think, as becoming a governor, is to understand your school. And so if you haven't looked at your previous Ofsted report for some time, that is probably where you need to start and just understand what happened during the last inspection. If it was a graded or ungraded, Section 5 or Section 8, what were the areas that in that report it highlighted as the areas for work to do, and what in your mind can you see as the pointers to say those things have happened. So let's have a look at the next slide. And really, Steve and I are in absolute agreement here. And Steve prefaced the whole session with this. It isn't about preparing specifically for an inspection. There will be operational work that the school will put in place. It will sort of check that they're doing the things that they should be doing. And I would suggest it is exactly the same for governance. If your governance is effective, if you are doing the things that the governing board need to do, if you're fulfilling your responsibilities and you have evidence to show that that is the case, and if you can confidently tell the story of your governance, what is your school working on? If you can answer those questions with confidence, because those are the things that you talk about in your board meeting, you are prepared for inspection because you are already doing what governance should do. And all that is happening really is that Ofsted are coming and they are saying, are you doing it at the level we expect governance to be done here? Are you checking the right things? Are you doing the job effectively? So if you are, then you are prepared. So we probably need to just clarify what we mean by that, and we'll look at that against the structure of how an inspection happens, so that you can kind of have a mental checklist of how this takes place in reference to what you do as a governing body. So let's have a look at that and see how an inspection sort of carries on. So the graded and ungraded inspections last 2 days. There's 2 days in the school, unless you're in an incredibly small school, in which case it can be a one-day inspection. But we're talking about schools where there are less than 150 pupils. And following on from recent blogs that Ofsted have made available, and they are very transparent. They're very good about sharing information. If you are expecting Ofsted in the next 12 months, it's a good idea to keep abreast, sign up and get those alerts from Ofsted and be aware of what is happening. But schools will know on by Monday afternoon if Ofsted are actually making an inspection that week. And most inspections, they have said, will now start on a Tuesday. And that is a new piece of information. That's a new way of working, if you like, that most inspections will now start on a Tuesday. So you're looking at Tuesday, Wednesday inspection, and you've not got any sort of holdovers where a 2-day inspection, and previously they tried to keep it that way as well, but you wouldn't have a Friday and a Monday, for example. It would be contained with 2 days back to back. It initially starts with the notification that the school has been selected and that the inspection team will be coming. But there is a very important part. This isn't new, but there has been some clarification here of a telephone conversation between the lead inspector and the head teacher. And there are details of that set out from section 99 in the handbook. And it gives you all of the information that the inspector might discuss with the head teacher, including context of the school in quite some detail, and then the planning of how the inspection will actually, the programme for inspection, if you like, how that will work with school. Because of course, initially, the school could be having trips or special events, and this would need to fit in with the way in which the inspection team plan out their programme, so that it works in tandem with that. The important thing here with the changes to this particular conversation is, and this is a thread that goes throughout the sort of initial changes that have been made and the big listen consultation that happened last year. You will be aware, no doubt, of the tragic death of Ruth Perry as a head teacher following an Ofsted inspection. And the very first bullet point of this planning conversation talks about the head teacher's well-being and being very careful that they understand that if there are any issues or concerns, and that appropriate support is there, has been there, and so that they are making sure that if they are concerned in any way that the head teacher is finding this a very stressful experience, that they make sure that there is adequate support through the process. And this is a sort of main lead into that conversation. And then we go into all of the context related issues. So thinking here about your governing body, who and how is the head teacher's well-being addressed in your school? Is that your chair's responsibility to have those regular meetings with the head teacher in terms of their normal role as a chair of governors? Are you clear and are you sure that your head teacher's well-being is part of that conversation, and that your head teacher is feeling well supported? If you're part of an academy, you have of course got support from the wider trust. If you are a maintained school, the local authorities support can be accessed for that. But as a governing board, you are responsible for staff wellbeing. You're responsible to ensure that there are systems and processes in place for support to be provided and accessed. And there should be a general oversight of head teachers' wellbeing as part of your chair of governors role. So that's really important. And then the final feedback is at the end of day 2. And that will be, governors will be invited to that. There isn't a limit to the number that can come. But of course, there is a limit in terms of it's a short term, it's a short timeline, and you will be told when that meeting will be with not much more than 36 hours notice, and for people to be actually available in school and able to listen is probably the biggest hurdle to overcome from that. So it usually is a smaller group, but it can be the whole board if they were able to be there, and notes can be taken of that meeting, and usually it'll be your governance professional or clerk who will be invited to do that. The
Linda,
important
sorry, Linda, just one quick question on the panel, which I think is an important one. Justine is actually asking, what can you do if you know your head teacher is struggling well-being wise? I think what I would suggest, Justine, I don't know whether you're a chair at in your school or trust, but if you feel that's the case, I would make sure that I was there at the start of the inspection itself on the the first day of inspection. I don't think it's appropriate to make telephone conversation, but certainly I would make sure I spoke to the lead inspector very near as possible the start of the inspection process. I would also be suggesting to the head teacher that they ensure that they are supported if you've got a deputy or assistant head, but by somebody else professional wise within the school, because that's perfectly acceptable now as well.
And there's a part of the handbook that is called suspend and return. It deals primarily with things like if safeguarding is if there are some concerns about safeguarding early on, and that is the first thing that they look at, they can suspend an inspection and return and pick it up at that stage. So less on that side for this conversation, but there is also that opportunity there about well-being and being able to structure in regular breaks for a head teacher who is finding the whole thing a little bit stressful. Now, what those taker breaks need to look like, they need to be supported and planned. So there will be an opportunity to, as Steve said, has that conversation with the lead inspector and say, this is something that that will be necessary or helpful here, and who is that support person that is going to work with your head teacher during that period of time. But don't let it go unspoken about, because of course this is what happened in the Ruth Perry case. And we want to avoid any of those kind of tragedies happening in the future. So that suspend and return is that area that will allow that to be supported, and to and it may even be decided in extreme cases that the inspection team don't carry on, that they do suspend it and come back and look at that again at a later date with the appropriate support in place. And then the final bullet point on this slide, the important thing, again arising from the Ruth Perry case, there is no overall grade. So the 4 areas are in a graded inspection are given a new grade. But overall, the school will not receive a grade as a school. And that has been removed because, of course, we haven't got a new framework, so they can't alter it in any way, but they're just not giving an overall grade, and you get your 4 area grades only. So how does governance play its part here? And I've sort of mentioned the well-being aspect, which I think is front and foremost for the very first thing that you need to think about after you've read your previous Ofsted report. Governors' meetings with inspectors. So they always meet with governors. And again, the main challenge here is that you will be told when that meeting is. And that will be part of that programme that has been decided. The programme is a very tight programme, and there is not always an opportunity to make any changes. So it tends to be a fixed time. The inspectors will meet with governors at this time at the school, and this is when it's going to be. Now, where that proves to be difficult, meetings can still be virtual, so it can be organised by using a platform such as this. And both Steve and I have been chairs in our own right, and we have both been subject to chairs' phone calls when we have been abroad during an inspection. And so, if you know that this is likely to be the case and you are a chair of governors, that might be something that you might want to prepare for. And in the majority of cases, the meeting will be between the inspectors and the governors. A head teacher won't be there. It's very exceptional for that to be the case. they won't be attending. So you will be giving an account of your governance as a little team of governors, and you will be having a conversation, and there will be questions put by the inspection team. But often this is a framed around a conversation, and it happens as tell me a little bit more about that and how has the school approached this. And if you know your school well, you will just be sharing the story of your governance. And importantly, if you are in an academy and you are serving as a member of a local board or a local committee, as the government terminology now suggests, one of the first things that the inspection team will establish when they're looking at the context of the school is the amount of governance that is actually delegated to that local governance committee. If it is very little in terms of this is about getting feedback and being part of the wider community of the school, so little governance delegation, then it will be inspected along with the management of the school, and the trust, the trustees, the trust board will be the accountable body that will meet with governors. If there are real governance delegation to that local committee, then it will be part and parcel of that conversation. So there will be a meeting with the local board, but there will usually be some kind of telephone conversation or virtual offer with trustees, or trustees may be invited to part of that. That will be arranged with the inspector, but it will be both areas of that in an academy, because there'll be some delegation usually to a local committee and some retained, particularly finance, for example. So they will look at that and they will make sure that they get the right fit and they talk to the right people about how governance is actually delivered within for that school. So if we look at how governance, then how the judgment around governance is made. So they'll be checking, if it's an ungraded inspection, that you are maintaining those good and outstanding aspects of school life. But the judgment around governance sits within the overall judgment for leadership and management. So that they will be looking at, excuse me, they'll be looking for evidence both in that oral conversation, and sometimes they will look at written documentation, minutes and monitoring reports, for example. They will look at what impact does that governance have on the life of the school, on standards, on safeguarding, on all of the legal compliance requirements of the school. And they will explore how that is divided up. So the scheme of delegation within an academy, they'll look at how effectively is that being delivered, the impact of that about right in terms of everybody know their part that they play in that, and how do the trustees keep account of what's happening at local board level, and what's the interaction between effectiveness and any concerns, how does that play out between the two tiers of governance. And they'll look at, with a maintained school, they'll be looking very closely at how does that board hold the school to account for all of those things. So all of those legal expectations that are placed on public bodies, including schools, equality, prevent, and a whole range of things around employment, all of those, the governing body are having to demonstrate that they have systems and processes in place that ensure compliance. And that's all part of your work programme, your planner throughout the year, the way in which you are assuring yourself by receiving information from your school that those things happen. And then just to clarify once again, in an academy, they'll look to understand how those roles are linked back to that scheme of delegation. So that they can be clear that governance is happening effectively for that individual school, even if it's part of a wider group of schools. So the very clear thing here is they'll explore how governors and trustees carry out their functions of governance. So let's just remind ourselves what they are. So the governance handbook that we had in previous years was replaced by specific guides for both maintained school governance and for academy governance. So there's two separate guides now, one for each of those types of schools. But the overall function of governance has not changed at all. It's still very similar. It will still be the things that you should recognise as we go through this list. Are you clear that the school has a clear vision for its pupils, both standards and progress, their achievement and their well-being? So is that vision really clear, and does it sit there shaping your school improvement or school development plan year on year? Does the monitoring that you have in place, or when you're looking at how well the school is delivering its development plan, its business plan, and those reports against that, both from the head teacher and governors doing their visits, is that all linked back to achieving a good outcome on the school business plan, school development plan? And is there clear processes and structures in place for managing and monitoring risks, both financial risks and other risks? I talked initially in that planning conversation about staff wellbeing and workload. What systems and processes are in place? And do you talk about staff wellbeing and how that is delivered across the school? And most schools will have a staff wellbeing survey or a staff survey that has wellbeing as part of or one of the questions around that. What's in place at your school? Do you know how that works? Because no doubt the inspectors will touch on that. So know what those things are, and you will be able to have those conversations. And it's not important just because it's important to Ofsted. It's important because it's important to your staff or your frontline delivery of standards to pupils. They need to feel supported, engaged, well managed and well trained in order to do the things that your school is asking for them. And thinking about your own context as a school and both the compliance aspects of safeguarding, child safeguarding, but also about any risks particularly associated with the context of your school, be it a primary or a secondary. Every school is slightly different in its safeguarding risks, and as well as the generic expectations around that very wide umbrella of safeguarding responsibilities. So don't just leave it to your safeguarding governor. Make sure you have an understanding of safeguarding as a governance function in terms of oversight and accountability. So how do we demonstrate that we have this accountability and that we are carrying it out effectively? How do we hold the school to account? Well, the biggest area of accountability that we probably see and would recognise immediately is we give a lot of the operational responsibility to the school through our head teacher. So our head teacher should be reporting to us on a regular basis. In maintained schools, we're looking at a minimum of 3 times a year, and that's the kind of normal pattern. Is we'll see 3 written head teacher reports, and then other data and documents that come against particular aspects of accountability and compliance. But what does your head teacher's report tell you about those responsibilities that a head teacher is responsible for and accountable to you for? And is it enabling you to see and understand and to make a mental checklist of, yes, we can see how that is happening in our school, and to clarify, we might want to ask these questions at our governing board meeting. So that section under head teacher's report or monitoring the school business plan, because again, your head teacher is giving an account of what they have done in that section since they last reported, that period of time. There should be a clear preparation from you as governors around what do you understand? Are there any things you want to clarify? Are there any areas you want to explore that aren't there in sufficient detail? Because these are the areas where we are then demonstrating that we are holding to account. And is clerking of those conversations effective when we approve the minutes at the next meeting? Is that giving a good account of what we actually did, of those questions that we asked? And then if we look at these other bullet points here, are we able to say, yes, this is where it fits into our pattern? How our structure is set up? Do we have lead governors? Do we have committees? Do we have people assigned to sections of compliance or sections of the school improvement plan, or a combination of those things? How do we monitor? How do we go into school and not make assessment visits, but go and observe how this is working in practice? Does it line up with what the head teacher's report is telling us? Do we ask questions? Are we inquiring? Do we have that inquiring mind where we are curious about how these things work, because it clarifies our understanding and the understanding of other governors? Check your minutes, make sure that there's a good account of what you are actually doing. How does head teacher's appraisal pattern work through that? They're responsible for setting the tone and moving the school forward. And usually there is a connect between the head teacher's appraisal process, other staff appraisal, and the business plan and the moving towards the vision of the school. And then there are various times that different people come into school that have an outside impartial observation of the school to perform. It might be part of the local authority or more senior members of the trust. It might be through the school's financial value standard process or auditors. It might be that you schedule and buy in school improvement visits from a third party, and often the chair of governors or another governor is part of that process. So it's engagement with activities that both are about compliance and also about improvement. So at this point, Steve will deal with any questions that he hasn't managed to answer, and he will then go into a little bit more detail about those 4 areas that I have alluded to a number of times. So over to you, Steve.
Lovely, thanks, Linda. Yeah, only just one comment I want to actually respond to. Vicky, thank you very much for what you've put in the chat, and there've been a couple of responses to that. I think what Linda said about the scheme of delegation is absolutely crucial if you're a governor in a multi-academy trust situation. And I would just reference you back, if you want to reference, paragraph 360 in the handbook, which is about how inspectors evaluate leadership and management. The very last bullet point is actually saying to inspectors, what you have to evaluate is how, or no, it's not how, sorry, this is whether leaders and governors stroke trustees all understand their respective roles and perform these in a way that enhances the effectiveness of the school. Now, of course, the respective roles in a multi-academy trust are determined by the scheme of delegation, and the communication of how that works has to be a two-way process, and that's what Ofsted will be looking for in terms of the effectiveness. So thanks for that point, Vicky. I think that was the one that was very well made. Okay, so let's move forward. What I wanted to do, and apologies, I was trying to respond to a question and I flashed a couple of these slides up inadvertently a few moments ago. Many of you will have seen this particular slide before, but this is just a reflection back to what I mentioned in the introduction and what Linda talked about. The basic framework has not changed. Now, we know it's going to change significantly at some stage in the not too distant future, and I'm going to come on to that in a few moments. But the basic Ofsted framework, the common inspection framework, as it's called, still relies on this structure that we have at the moment. Quality of education is absolutely the foundation of the inspection, and the handbook reflects that as well, of course. Quality of education is all about the curriculum, quality of teaching and pupil outcomes. The reason it's shown in a big box here, taking up 50% of the space, is because actually the reality is the framework now is very much about spending the vast majority of time on that quality of education judgment. The other three judgments are important, of course, but they together are, roughly speaking, now they often don't walk around with stopwatches or anything like that, but roughly speaking, the way that they work, the way that they gather evidence, the way that they judge is based on this framework. And the next slide I'm going to share with you is basically really a reflection of those four key aspects that are judged by Ofsted and still continue to be judged. And again, there were quite a few comments on the chat about, well, doesn't this still lead to an overall good or an overall outstanding or whatever? In many people's minds, it does. And if you've seen any reports that have actually been published since Ofsted made this change with no overall judgment, if you've got four headlines on the front page that say good, 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 or whatever it says, yes, of course, you're going to make that overall judgment. So, in a way, this is very much a reflection on what Linda said about the Ruth Perry sad situation, that Ofsted have actually been seen to react, but the reality is the framework has not changed. And therefore, as governors, we still have to maintain that same mindset, which is about, are we focusing on what we should be focusing on? And of course, all of those things that Linda said permeate every one of these different areas of the framework. So when we're thinking about the quality of education, governors have to ensure first and foremost that, of course, because the curriculum is so significant, we have to ensure that we have evidence that we've discussed our curriculum, we've sought assurance that it's compliant, we've got breadth, we've got balance in our curriculum, and as governors, we're still expected to provide examples of that. Excuse me. And of course, Ofsted is always, don't forget the name is actually an acronym, the Office for Standards in Education. They're always going to be focused on outcomes. They may say something slightly different, but it is obviously about outcomes. Pupils go to school to learn, and that's what's ultimately going to be judged. And of course, reading has become the cornerstone of a lot of those deep dives from a curriculum perspective. It's always one of the deep dive focuses, even in secondary schools, and that's something that as governors we have to be mindful of. Deep dives are no longer a feature in the ungraded inspections, of course. It doesn't mean to say Ofsted will not seek evidence to still be assured that reading is actually being promoted effectively. Governors, of course, need to be aware of how good behaviour is and what pupils' attitudes to their learning are in their schools, and that should be based on evidence, some of which can be anecdotal, but increasingly as governors we need to be thinking about, what do we know? What are the facts about our schools that we know how behaviour is managed in the classroom and beyond the classroom? And specifically, something that Ofsted have always been interested in, this concept of low-level disruption. Low-level disruption happens. It's a fact of life in the vast majority of schools. It's about how it's responded to. So again, a governance overview on that is actually really important as well. And never forget, and again, we've done webinars on this for governors for schools in the past, attendance is absolutely crucial plank of government policy. It was for the previous government, it continues to be for this one. That's not going to go away. We should, as governors, have a very clear understanding of not just where attendance is in our school, but actually what we're doing in terms of specific actions as a school or as a trust to improve attendance in our schools. Personal development, again, Ofsted are interested in knowing how we promote the personal development of pupils within our schools. They want to know that youngsters themselves actually feel safe. So again, there's a reference to safeguarding there, even though the largest element of that comes within leadership and management. But they want to know that pupils are happy, that they're listened to, that they feel valued in their schools, etc. And there is also this readiness aspect of personal development. Does the personal development that is actually provided in our schools, does it prepare youngsters for the next stage of their education, or if education is actually coming to an end for some of them, the next stage of their life? So there's a lot there about PSHE, about British values, about safeguarding from a pupil perspective in terms of things like the prevent duty, etc., being drawn into extremism and radicalized. All of those things are important and feed into that idea that we're actually hopefully preparing our children and young people to become sensible, caring, economically successful young people to go out into the big wide world. And then leadership and management, which, as Linda said, is all encompassing of school leaders and us as governors, because we are part of leadership as well, of course. And it's about the effectiveness of our safeguarding procedures. It is about the way in which the curriculum, very much part of the quality of education judgment, of course, as we've said, it's about how that is led in the school. It's also about how behaviour is led, of course. And it's also, coming back to Linda's last slide, it's about how, as governors, we demonstrate that we are actually living up to the expectations that the government has of us in terms of our roles specified within the scheme of delegation, but detailed in those governance guides that Linda mentioned as well. I think it's also important to just reflect on some of the questions. Now, you won't always get these, and many of you who've been through inspections, like Vicky, these may not have been all of the questions that are asked, but these are probably, based on Linda's and my experience, the most common questions that are asked. There will be others as well. As I say, this is not an exhaustive list. Very often, a question is hidden in a request. So, tell me about your school's vision is a nice friendly way of saying, I want to know what your school vision is. What's your understanding of it? And I would also, if I was responding to that question, go into the detail of the role that governors play in reviewing a vision, updating a vision when it's appropriate to do so. How has your school improved since it was last inspected? That's really just to check that as governors, we know what Ofsted said last time. And again, there was a question in the chat earlier about what if your inspection was 8, 9 years ago? Doesn't matter how long ago it was. The important thing is, did you respond to what Ofsted said the school needed to do to improve further, or whatever the comments were? And where are you now on those aspects of the work of the school?
The other thing I would say about that, although that was a graded inspection, there will have been monitoring inspections in the meantime, and they will also have had commented on how far you've got towards that or any other aspect. So don't just read the graded report, but also read any follow-up monitoring visits. And they'll just be letters, 1 or 2 page letters, but they'll be on the Ofsted's site, and they should be on your school's website.
Absolutely. I think in the case in the chat, it was probably a former outstanding school that hadn't yet had its inspection. There are very few of those left now, of course. But again, as Linda says, go onto the Ofsted website. It should be on your school's website. It statutorily must be there. But look at all of them. So that's good advice. Thanks, Linda. Linda mentioned context a little bit earlier. Do we know, as part of that context, what our schools are doing in response to what the attendance context is right now? As I say, it's not enough just to know the numbers. You have to know, well, okay, how are we responding to that? If we've got a number of persistent absentees, rather, what are we doing to tackle persistent absenteeism? It's not for us as governors to know what's happening to individual families, individual pupils, etc., but we have to know the sort of interventions that are being put in place to hopefully try and improve that attendance overall. And then again, a return to this concept of workload. This is important, which is why we've mentioned it quite a few times this morning. Governors are expected to know, firstly, what the school is doing to improve well-being and reduce workload pressures on teachers and other staff. And of course, they also want to know, well, what do you as governors do to ensure that your teacher achieves hopefully some work-life balance, but workload pressures don't put their well-being under pressure either? I can see there's a question from Ray on the Q&A. So I presume that the role of the link governor to respond to specific areas such as attendance and finance. I think that links back to what Linda was saying, Ray, about those governors that actually are interviewed by Ofsted. It's not a good idea to take the whole governing body with you. There's nothing to stop you, but actually, I don't believe that gives you the opportunity to demonstrate the effectiveness of governors. You've probably only got 25 minutes, 30 minutes maximum in that interview. I would take three maximum governors and make sure that they are able to talk about all aspects of school life. So don't worry too much about finance at this stage. It's rarely, if ever, talked about in an Ofsted inspection. Things like attendance are. So these are things that should be talked about at full governing body level. You don't have to be word perfect. Ofsted's not a memory test, but you need to be able to say that's discussed at full governing body meeting if you look at the minutes, or that's discussed in this committee or that committee, whatever it happens to be, if you have a committee structure in place. Okay, what I want to do now is just spend the last 10 minutes looking to the future. As we said, there's lots going on in the media at the moment, specifically in the educational media. There's quite an intense amount of speculation. Some of it is accurate, some of it is actually hearsay. But the new His Majesty's Chief Inspector, Martin Oliver, has actually made a couple of speeches recently. So what I'm going to share with you is actually what is being reported at the moment based on what Ofsted themselves have said. There's lots of disquiet as well, and I think we have to see how that is actually going to impact what happens in the future. We already know, because there's lots has been said, and of course the government now in their election manifesto talked about scrapping of the framework as it works at the moment and replacing it with a scorecard system. That is likely, nobody's confirmed September yet, it is likely to be September based on what is already known, but that's September next year. So all of you who are expecting to be visited by Ofsted between now and next September, everything that we've set up until now absolutely applies. What we also know about what's coming down the road is Ofsted are calling it a focus on inclusion. I would say it's going to be a greater focus on inclusion. There's already a focus on inclusion. They happen to talk about it in the current framework under the guise of equality. Well, actually, equality and equity are all about inclusion anyway. But I think we'll see what that looks like as the new framework, whenever it comes in, is that what it actually looks like. What we do know is that there's going to be a consultation in the new year. Again, we don't know specifically when yet, but Martin Oliver has actually said they are going to be consulting. And my guess is what they will do, what they've done in the past, they'll be trialing certain formats for a new framework as well. Something that has caused a lot of debate amongst the education unions, professional associations, etc., is Ofsted are proposing at this stage, it would appear, to move to 5 new judgments to replace the outstanding, the good, the requires improvement, and the inadequate. Now, forgive me saying this is very much a personal viewpoint. For me, this is playing with semantics because, consult your thesaurus, and one of the words that you'll find for outstanding probably is exemplary. But we're looking at words at the moment, words and phrases: exemplary, strong practice, secure, attention needed, and causing concern. And you can see that all of these things are not really taking us a huge distance away from perhaps where a lot of people will perceive the inspection system currently operated by Ofsted to be at this point in time. The scorecard means that there are going to be more areas looked at, scrutinised, judged by Ofsted going forward if this materialises the way it is looking at the moment. And they have already said that there are going to be 10 areas, aspects of the school and its operation that will actually be judged or graded, so to speak. Again, there is nothing to say that there will be any overall judgment. The fact it's gone already, I think we can assume there won't. Instead, we will get these 10 aspects of the school which are judged to be exemplary, etc. And those 10 areas are, and I'm sorry if the type or the font is a wee bit smaller, but I wanted to get all 10 of them on the same slide here. Again, you'll see there's a bit of similarity with where we are right now. Curriculum, and this is Ofsted's list, not mine, is at the top of the list. They've then put teaching and achievement underneath that. That's pupil achievement, of course. And those three together, of course, at the moment are very much the quality of education judgment in the existing framework. We've then got leadership. We've got something called behavior and values. Preparation for next steps. And again, you'll see this resonates with a lot of the comments I made on the previous slides. Opportunities to thrive. That's, for me, is very much a hark to the current personal development judgment, of course. We've then got inclusion and belonging. And we've still got safeguarding as a separate area to be judged at the bottom. So, if you look, if you're interested, you can look on the Schools Week website. There's a lot has actually been said there. The Times Educational Supplement, or TES as it's more routinely known these days, there's a subscription site, but I think you're allowed to view a couple of articles. There's a lot being said there. And again, if you look at the blogs from the National Education Union, the National Association of Head Teachers, etc., a lot has been said here. And some of your head teachers, senior leaders, CEOs, etc., will have views about this. I think it's important from our perspective as governors and trustees to recognise this is going to be consulted on, apparently. Keep your eyes and ears open for that, and if you care about it, make sure you respond. Ofsted did put a blog post up, and we did talk about this briefly in the hot topic session that we ran for Governors for Schools a few weeks back now. And I just wanted to actually reiterate that there have been changes already. Section 8, as we know, are called ungraded inspections, and I referenced the fact that deep dives were disappearing. That has already happened. I just wanted to use this slide again because I think it's important to understand now that from an ungraded inspection perspective, what Ofsted are now trying to do in all inspections, and we're receiving feedback that this absolutely is actually being seen, is that it's about a dialogue. It's about a dialogue with school leaders, trust leaders, giving them the opportunity to show Ofsted inspectors what their improvement agenda is, but also whether they've got that accurate self-evaluation. So are we saying, well, okay, this is what we're good at, but these are areas where we realise that there's further development for work still to be done. So we're going back in a way to a framework that was predicated on effective self-evaluation about 10 years or so ago now, but in a slightly different way. This is far more of a dialogue now. Deep dives have gone, so they're not looking at individual subjects in the same way, but they will be focusing, and we've seen this, I've seen this in a school that I was talking to last week, where they actually talked about different groups of subjects. So what about the humanities? What about your core subjects? What are you actually doing here? How does the curriculum link with assessment, etc.? And Ofsted have said, as you would expect them to, some conversations may be challenging. And I think what they mean by challenging is that ultimately our schools exist for our pupils to learn, and we expect our pupils to be safe in them. Of course we do. If Ofsted don't believe that's the case, that's where that challenge is actually going to come in. But they're also going to be providing challenge where they believe, and again, this is language that was used in a couple of frameworks ago, that schools are perhaps not as ambitious as they used to be. Ofsted aren't going to be using the word coasting because that does have connotations, but I believe that's what they're actually getting at here. And that just leaves us really with a few questions that you might want to ponder on if you don't know the answer at this point in time. Are you due an inspection, and do you know if it's going to be an ungraded inspection? Because actually that's relevant. Leaders need to know about those changes. So if you're taking this back, and I see a few people have actually put in chat and questions, are we going to get copies of the slides? Yes, you absolutely are. So maybe take these slides, share them with your head teacher, share them with senior leaders in your school, because actually if senior leaders are expecting an ungraded inspection, as it has been, they're going to be getting a little bit of a surprise, to say the least. And actually, from a governance perspective, we need to actually hold the mirror up ourselves and ask if we are as focused on self-evaluation as we ought to be. We are part of leadership. It's us and the senior leadership teams in our schools and trusts together. We need to have an accurate view of where our schools are, both in terms of strength and in terms of those areas for further improvement. And that does bring us very close to time, so apologies for that. I don't know whether there are any further questions on the panel at the moment, Linda.
Sorry, struggling to unmute myself this morning for some reason. No, there's no specific questions. Really, we're just really people valuing what we've shared with them today, which is very nice. Thank you.
Yes.
It's as long as it's useful, that is really what we're trying to do here, is to make sure that the messages are clear about expectations and that they link to what you're already doing as a governor.
Absolutely. And what we will do, Linda and I, after the event is we will look through the chat log, we'll look through the question bank. If there's anything that we don't think we've fully answered, we will get back to you individually on those. So thank you very much indeed for that. And that just brings us to conclude the session by saying a very big thank you for joining us this morning. Please do come back to future webinars. There's always a lot going on. There will be a fairly dynamic agenda going forward. There's no doubt about that. Enjoy the rest of the day. It's fairly miserable where I am at the moment. Hopefully the sun may appear later. But thank you very much indeed, folks, and goodbye.
Thank you and goodbye.